Hello, it's good to see everybody today. Thank you for joining us. We're delighted to have David Kirkman returning from another visit with us. David was um, let's see, an enforcement attorney with the North Carolina Attorney General's office for 30 years. So he's got a vast amount of experience. Um, and he's also an author. Maybe he'll tell us about that. And if people have comments or questions, you could put them in. People have different formats, so a lot of times it's on the right side of your screen, and for some people, the comment section might be on the lower part of your machine. And we'll try to get to those as soon as we can. Dave, do you want to mention your book just for a sec?
Sure, thanks. I wrote a book based upon my experiences dealing with the elder fraud industry when I was in the Attorney General's office here in North Carolina, and it's called Elder Fraud Wars, and I hope everybody will get a chance to take a look at it.
Yeah, I've read it. There's a lot of great information. I've even run into people I know in the book, so that made it even more exciting. So thank you.
You're welcome, and thanks.
Let's see, we were together last spring when we talked about the dark web, and that might be a program that people want to go back and look at again. It's a pretty scary place, but it's become prevalent in our lives. So you might want to check out that webinar that we did, and maybe we can get it on the screen so you can see how to find that. But today we're going to talk about the bane of our existence, robocalls. You know, we're out in the garage trying to get something off a top shelf and the phone rings. And so, you know, you feel like, oh, I'm going to go look. And anyway, so it's reported that almost 60 billion, that's with a B, robocalls were made to phones in the U.S. this year. Plus, there were an equal number of telemarketing calls from the Do Not Call Registry. So is the registry really a failure? Tell us about that.
The answer is actually no, it's not a failure. What it was originally intended to do was to stop legitimate marketing companies from calling people whose numbers were on the Do Not Call registry. And it actually did succeed in doing that, but the problem became with criminals and scam artists of all sorts calling in from all over the world and just flooding us with all these telemarketing calls. Criminals don't care about the Do Not Call registry. They don't worry about the penalties that an American court might impose on them because they're over in India or the Philippines or the Ukraine. They're untouchable basically. So it's worked against its intended target, but there was some unforeseen consequences or gaps in the enforcement mechanism there for the criminals.
You know, AARP has the magazine and the bulletin, and for those of you that get that, I think it was the April issue of the bulletin had a whole article on boiler rooms, and I think they were in India. But these are the places where there's just lots of people making all these calls. Every month, both the magazine and the bulletin have great information about fraud. So
those are great articles. And yeah, it just shows how it migrated out from the United States when it became illegal to do calls like this, and just went to other countries, and the problem still persists.
Exactly. Well, why and when did these robocalls and unwanted telemarketing calls become such a problem? I don't remember them, you know, maybe in the late 80s or anything like that.
Yeah, it basically became a problem with robocalls and telemarketing calls around the mid 80s as long distance calling became cheaper and cheaper. Do you remember 10 cents a minute? A certain phone company advertising that rate. Before that, it was 20, 30, sometimes 40 cents a minute. So back then it was expensive to do telemarketing and make any money off of it. But as we went through the 80s, the prices started going down and down farther and farther, even in the 90s. And then by the late 90s, we started having voice over internet phone calling. Early 2000s, it became widespread, and you could just call from anywhere in the world into the United States for virtually nothing. And so it started in the 80s, it progressed all through the 90s, and now the plague has been upon us for almost 20 years. The problem with robocalls started basically at the same time, but the robocall technology was fairly primitive. It was basically something you could use for local calls, normally by political campaigns. And that's when people started pressing for robocall legislation to stop it, which was back in the 80s, to stop these calls from political candidates. But for telemarketing and for fraud, it really became more popular to use robocalling in the early 2000s when it became just dirt cheap.
Well, so what is the connection between elder fraud and telemarketing, the robocalls?
It was a very strong connection. A lot of the original telemarketing industry, people started breaking bad almost immediately and going into fraud. Instead of selling calendars or widgets, they saw how they could make $500 per call or $2,000 per call by doing fraud. And so that began very early back in the late 80s. And so we've always seen a parallel between the regular legitimate telemarketing industry and its development and the technologies that they employ, and then the fraud industry and how they use the phone system and the robocalling technology and the call spoofing technologies that are all out there. They overlap tremendously.
And you just said spoofing. What do you mean when you say spoofing?
Well, that's if you have a caller ID mechanism on your phone or on your cell phone especially, and when a call comes in, it gives you a phone number and oftentimes the name of the caller. And so one of the things that's happened as technology has advanced on behalf of the telemarketers and the fraud artists is that they have been able to spoof or substitute a different number onto that caller ID screen of yours, substitute a different name onto that caller ID screen. For instance, if they were running the IRS scam, which has been plaguing us for almost 10 years now, they could actually make it look like the IRS name was on your screen, and a Washington area code 202 is also there for the number. And so you think, wow, this really is the IRS, but it's some guy in Pakistan or in Spain.
With my caller ID, I've even gotten phone calls from my own phone number. I mean, and I expect I get, 8 to 10 of these a day. It's just, as I said, the bane of our existence. Well, you're known for fighting elder fraud, and I'm just looking at an enforcement attorney. So how much experience have you had with robocalls and telemarketers in your work?
Well, I sued my first telemarketer. It was a scam group, Las Vegas group, back in 1991. And I sued another robocaller that same year. So my experience goes way back 30 years. And I've watched the industry become more and more sophisticated as it goes along. But their whole theme as far as elder fraud is searching for people who are vulnerable to a certain type of pitch. And usually that's a fairly small percentage of people. And the thing that makes robocalling so wonderful for a fraud artist is, they want to get rid of the 98% of the people who are not going to fall for this fraudulent pitch. And so they do that through robocalls that feature what's called press one dialing to speak to an official or an operator. And so most people, they don't press one, they just hang up. And then maybe 2% will press one, half of them want to just blow out whoever's calling them with the robo dialer. And then the other 1% or 0.5% are the people who actually might fall for this scammy pitch that they're making, the IRS scam or the jury duty scam. And so it makes it very easy for the scammers to filter out all the dead wood, as they call it, the people who are not going to respond, and find that person who might be having early cognitive decline or advancing cognitive decline and run the elder scam on them.
Or they might be lonely and it's somebody to talk to.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah.
Or they could be terribly frightened by the recorded message itself saying you're going to be arrested. And so, a lot of us, we're going to be calm enough not to fall for that, but a lot of other people don't. And unfortunately, a lot of them tend to be older. And that's why the elder fraud industry uses these press one robocall devices every second of the day just putting in hundreds of thousands of calls per minute into the United States.
So you're suggesting don't press anything.
No.
Better yet, don't answer the phone.
That's right. And if you're alarmed about a call supposedly from the county sheriff saying you missed jury duty, you have to pay a fine, or the IRS, just call the local sheriff back or call the IRS directly from the phone number in your phone book, but never press 1 to talk to those people, because they're going to be people based overseas who are trying to defraud you.
And even if you pick up the phone, then they know they've got a live person there. So that's what I'm always telling people: don't answer the phone. If it's your grandchild or your child or whatever, people will leave a message. Just don't answer the phone. But that's incredibly difficult for many people.
Yeah, it's a shame that we have to do that. But that's because the technological advantages that the fraud industry has over us right now.
Yeah. And anytime anybody asks you to press a button, press 1 to talk to a representative, press 9 to get deleted from these kinds of calls. No.
Neither one will do you any good.
Yeah.
So press 9 doesn't get you off any kind of list. They're just calling randomly. They don't even have a list.
Right, or else it lets them know that they have a live person, and they maybe will call back with a different kind of approach. Yes. So you've worked both in North Carolina and federal kinds of that lawsuit you referred to. Was that just North Carolina, or have you worked on federal cases as well?
I've gotten restraining orders and injunctions against hundreds of telemarketers, individual groups or persons. And most of those were in North Carolina courts, but a large group of them were actually done in federal court using the federal statute, because we could get a nationwide injunction instead of a statewide injunction against these telemarketers or scammers. And the big case that you're referring to was against actually a pretty major US company, a Fortune 500 company, that was continuing to calls to people in a do not call registry and robocalls by the millions back during the period 2005 to 20. And that was one of the biggest cases I ever handled. And it featured not only this legitimate business, but also some third-party groups that they had hired, or some of their retailers had hired to make these types of calls. And so the result was a huge court judgment after a 6-year court battle for $1 billion in penalties.
Yeah.
And it was a team of U.S. Justice Department attorneys and assistant attorneys general like me from 4 different states. And we got that judgment about 4 years ago.
That's really exciting. Really exciting. Yeah. And it was $1 billion?
It was $250 million, the judgment itself. And then the other side appealed it for years and years. And then it was settled for $200 million for all 4 or 5 plaintiffs involved. But it was the largest, still after that, it was still the largest penalty ever imposed against a company that engaged in telemarketing and illegal robocalls and calls to people whose numbers were on the do not call registry, and also people who had asked the company to put them on their own internal do not call registry. You can also do that, even if you're not on a do not call registry, or you are and you have an ongoing business relationship with that company. You can still tell them, put me on your internal do not call list, and they have to respect that.
Okay. I didn't know that. Okay. I know when I buy something online, I tell, from a company, I say, do not sell, rent, give my name and information away. And they'll say, oh, yeah, you're on our list. I mean, reputable companies certainly honor that.
Mm-hmm. There's a loophole in all these state and federal statutes that says if you have an ongoing business relationship with a company, they can still call you even though you're on the do not call list. But the as soon as you tell them, please put me on your do not call list, your internal do not call list, do not call me again. And I've used that many times with legitimate companies like my satellite TV company and some others.
Okay, that's good information. So why didn't this these lawsuits stop this problem?
It gets back to the fact that a lot of the people who are violating these laws now are just criminals, and many of them are based overseas. I would say that 80 to 90% of them are based overseas, and they know that our court orders can't really touch them over there, and in the South Pacific or in Eastern Europe, and they just know that they don't have much to worry about. So they run their robocall machines 24/7, calling to the U.S., to Australia, to England, and they know that they act almost with impunity. It's very seldom that federal authorities are able to actually capture these people in the act and shut them down with the help of the other countries.
I'm just thinking, how do they get the money that they've scammed people out of? How does that get transpired?
Well, for the longest time, they would just get people to go to their local grocery store or drugstore and go to the MoneyGram counter or the Western Union counter at the very front of the store and wire the money overseas. And then there was a big crackdown on Western Union, MoneyGram, and other money transmitters that caused them to clamp down on this. So now they're asking people to go buy gift cards in $500 denominations. And as soon as they get out into the parking lot of the grocery store or the drugstore, read the numbers of the gift cards off to them. So that's how they get the money now. And as soon as those numbers are read off to those scammers in Portugal or West Africa, those scammers go on the dark web and sell that information, maybe for 50 cents on the dollar, but they've got, hundreds of dollars, maybe thousands of dollars out of a victim in the matter of 5 minutes.
So the general advice is, if somebody you don't know asks for a gift card, that's a big red flag for fraud.
It surely is, especially if it's somebody pretending to be with the IRS or the local sheriff's department and saying you got to pay this fine right now or you're going to be arrested. Go to your grocery store and buy $3,000 worth of gift cards right now, or you're going to be arrested. That's a scam. No legitimate government agent is ever going to do that. No legitimate business will ever do that.
Right. I guess in part, if we could educate some of the places that sell gift cards to maybe ask a few questions. I think there's a whole educational opportunity here to do some intervention about, and I don't know now, Western Union, I think, does ask questions.
They do. And some of the big retailers are being really good about it as well. I've actually been stopped when I was buying a gift card for a member of my family for their birthday, but they saw my gray hair, I guess, and they just thought, well, maybe this is one of those people. And I assured them, no, it's only a $50 gift card, and it's for my relative. And thanks so much.
Okay, well, that's good. That's really good, yeah.
I always thank them when they do that, or I see them doing it with some other customer. I always thank them and tell them how it can really go south for some people.
Yeah. Well, yeah. I guess I haven't ever bought a gift card. So anyway, but that's really good. So what are some solutions? What are we going to do? Because you've talked about all the barriers that we're encountering on this, but what are some opportunities to correct this?
Well, technology got us into this predicament. The technologies that were made available to the telemarketing industry and also to the fraud industry. Mm-hmm. So they've had a huge advantage over us for the past, I would say, 20 years, 25 years. And now, finally, the industry is responding to demands from the public and also demands from Congress and state legislators, prosecutors, and making available some technologies, some apps that you can download that filter out a lot of these spam calls, which is what they are, these robocalls or spam telemarketing calls. And they utilize a lot of the same technology that you might have on your computer that keeps you from getting these spam emails. You're probably protected from just hundreds of those emails a day if you have a really good spam protection device or security system on your computer. So the phone service providers, including the internet phone service providers, are now making available technologies that actually allow you to better screen the calls that are coming in, to actually block the call so it doesn't even ring your telephone if it seems to be coming from one of these groups that shows patterns of being a scam group or a robocalling group. And so these technologies are going to be our weapon to counter all their technology that they can bombard us with these calls with. So there was a statute called the Trace Act that was enacted by Congress in late 2019 and signed into law by the president in January 2020 that actually forces phone companies and internet phone carriers to adopt better technologies that will be able to identify these types of spam calls and robocalls and also block them. And to be able, it will also allow people to be able to see who's actually really calling. We talked a minute ago about spoofed caller ID information, the phony names and phone numbers that are on there that fake us out so many times. The technology is there to actually force the caller to use their true identity. And so these phone companies are now, based upon a deadline set forth in that act, as of July 1st, required to convey the actual caller ID. And that's why you may be noticing on your cell phone especially, the call will come in and it will say suspected spam or possible fraud. And that's the result of this federal legislation and the regulations that the Federal Communications Commission put in as a result of that legislation. And there are going to be other efforts as well to try to filter out even more of these robocalls and spam telemarketing calls, and to make it even harder for these people to utilize the technology that's available to them to scam us. And so that's the long and the short of it. We have to wait for this technology to come our way, to utilize it if we can, and wait further for even better technology so that we can actually catch up in this arms race with the fraud industry, with the scammers. Now you can also, there are various products that are on the market that, and it's not just the phone companies themselves that offer these things. There are third-party companies that have apps that are available on the internet that you can download onto your cell phone, for instance, that will help to filter these things out as well. Some of these are quite good. And I know I have a lot of friends who have certain ones that they really swear by, and they're great for cell phones. They're not so good in most cases for landline phones, which is the phone that keeps ringing off the hook in our house.
Right.
Because, we can't do much about scammers calling that phone except unhook it completely.
Yeah. Okay. Mine does say spam likely some of the time. I think we've got a question that's come in. Oh, how do they know someone's a senior citizen? Good question. How do they get that information, Dave?
There's several ways. A lot of phone services and lead lists that are sold on the internet, both legitimately and illegitimately on the dark web, have phone numbers, and they also say the age of the person who has that number. So that's number one, how they do it. And then with the robocalls, they don't care who they're calling, but the pitch is designed to trick or scare an older adult. So because of what we talked about earlier, most people just hang up the robocall, and only people who might have certain age-related vulnerabilities will respond to it. That leads them straight to an older person and enables them to do a senior scam or a senior fraud. That's a great question.
Yeah. And of course, so much is available in the public domain.
Yes.
And I don't know how much foreign scammers can get into, through the dark web for sure.
The dark web will sell names of people who are, say, age 74 and love sweepstakes, or they're that age and they're on some Lonely Hearts Club website. And here's their phone number if you want to call and scam them with a sweetheart scam. So the dark web is the source of a lot of these, and it's very scary. I've seen what kind of information they have out there about people in my age group and older. And
hopefully people can access the webinar we did on the dark web. I don't know if we can get it to go on the screen, but we have two more questions.
Okay.
Okay, somebody, I joined late, so maybe you've answered this. We have such technology and smart people. Why can't we Americans stop this with more technology? And I'm in Michigan, and why doesn't Michigan do not call list work? And I think we did kind of address that. So if somebody, this is being recorded, so somebody can go back and watch this webinar again, and because we did go over that. And then there's another question.
Can we suggest one of the apps for the cell phones? We can't name any particular product on this program, is my understanding, but I would just suggest go on the internet and do a search for robocall apps, and you will see various sources like Consumer Reports or PC Magazine or other sources that you trust, and they will list various products and how they work. And you'll also notice probably the same 5 or 6 products being mentioned over and over and over again. And I would just say, take a look at one of those products. Even though we can't name them, they're out there and they're well received.
When all of this do not call was begun, charities and political calls were allowed. Will political calls ever be outlawed?
The original robocall statute in North Carolina did outlaw political calls, but then when they amended the statute, the North Carolina legislature decided to give politicians and political campaigns an exemption from the robocall ban and the do not call registry ban. And that's, for some reason, repeated itself in every other state that has a do not call statute, and also on the federal level. So the politicians apparently have decided they're entitled to an exemption, and they wrote it into the law that way. So there we have it.
So, okay, as you say, there we have it. Okay. Let's see. Are there more questions? Have they come in? Okay. How can I find out if my cell phone, email address, and/or name have been sold on the dark web? And if so, is there anything I can do about that?
The answer is yes. It's probably already out there on the dark web. There are also legitimate list brokerage companies here in the United States that have everybody's phone number and who's the phone subscriber, and anybody could purchase, a list like that. And so the information is already out there. So that's why we need to avail ourselves of all these new technologies that are finally coming to the consumers to help them block these types of calls. But our information is already out there. It's going to stay out there.
And let's see, another question. What additional action should the average fraud call recipient do to further stop this issue? Great question.
There are so many things you can do, not only to protect yourself, but also to talk to your friends about these types of scams, especially your older friends and relatives. Just make it a regular practice to talk about the latest scams you've read about or heard about, or that called you with a robocall, and to heighten the awareness of this person who might actually be a target of these people, or might be a successful target of these people. And we find that sometimes the trusted friend is the one who breaks up a telemarketing fraud against an older individual or even a younger individual far quicker than somebody at a bank or a grocery store or a law enforcement agency can do it, because they trust their best friends when they talk about these things. Exactly.
Another resource that we really want people to report to, and you don't have to be a member of AARP, is the AARP Fraud Watch. And they're getting about 450 to 500 calls a day about fraud. The other place is look up your Attorney General's office. They have fraud intake in at least in North Carolina. They have real life people doing that. And I think the sheriff and the police, I think the more law enforcement that we can let you know what's going on, even if they've heard it 53 times, it builds a case. So that's important to be reporting it and to talking with, as you said, friends and family, because if we all share information, that's great. Are there any more questions? Okay, I don't see any more coming in. Well, the magic hour has arrived, Dave, and so we'll need to say goodbye to people. But I think in October we might have some more webinars on fraud and scams. So stay tuned to look for more opportunities to learn about these. And we just put up the information on, at least for North Carolina. Sometimes ARP will promote our programs nationally, so hopefully they'll do that again for us. So Dave, any parting words?
No, just thank you for hosting me on this. I know that telemarketing and robocalling is such a plague, and I just fought against those people for years and years. It was very satisfying, but it's still a problem. Technology is still the advantage of the telemarketers, so we have to fight back with technology and awareness. And this show has been great about talking about those things.
And using common sense too, for sure. Okay, well, thank you very much, and we'll bid adieu to people, and thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.